encouraging an environment that values a diverse and inclusive workforce by cultivating leadership and organizational capacities, honoring cultural humility. Stephanie has assumed a leadership role in the Celebrating Diversity Work Group, which is an action-oriented group of leaders with lived experience. This work group routinely questions how power and privilege are practiced in government and organizational policies, practices, and programs. Stephanie uplifts, amplifies, and mobilizes the voices of experiences of BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, and other marginalized groups. She examines disparate and disproportional outcomes at the systemic, institutional, and individual impact level. Stephanie leads a group of 8 professional staff that work on these issues and make recommendations to executive staff regarding equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives. Stephanie disrupts overt, covert, implicit, and explicit racism, homophobia, sexism, xenophobia, and other phobias and isms. She labels oppression, racism, power, disproportionality, disparity, white discomfort, resistance, fragility, and privilege. Stephanie intentionally engages in a daily practice of examining her own biases and beliefs, commits to decentering the experience of whiteness, challenges practices that perpetuate oppression and power imbalances, while promoting practices that center collective community healing, health equity, and repair. Stephanie is the next generation of a Jedi, that's justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion promoter. Her skill set, passion, and dedication to equity, inclusion, and diversity are part of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream. She is making an impact in the Waukesha County community. Congratulations to Stephanie Engel. Now, it is my honor to introduce Reverend Dr. Jamie Washington, pronouns he, him, his, the president and founder of the Washington Consultant Group, WCG. WCG was named by The Economist as one of the top 10 global diversity consultants in the world. Reverend Dr. Washington has served as an educator, administrator, and consultant for over 37 years. He serves as an invited instructor in the Harvard Graduate School of Education and the Lancaster Theological Seminary. He is the president and co-founder of the Social Justice Training Institute and a past president of the American College Personnel Association, ACPA. Reverend Dr. Washington earned his BS degree from Slippery Rock State College, a double Master of Science degrees from Indiana University, Bloomington, a PhD in college student development from the University of Maryland, College Park, and a Master of Divinity from Howard University School of Divinity. He has been honored as a distinguished alumnus from both Indiana University, Bloomington, and the University of Maryland, College Park. He received an honorary Doctor of Business from Shepherd University in May 2019, and received an honorary Doctor of Law from Wheaton College of Massachusetts in May 2021. Reverend Dr. Washington has received many awards and honors. He was honored with the University of Maryland, Baltimore County's Legends of Excellence Award for his contribution to the lives and education of Black and Latinx faculty, staff, and students. He is a member of Omicron, Delta Kappa, Golden Key, Alpha Phi Omega, Phi Delta Kappa, and a life member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Reverend Dr. Washington also serves as the pastor of Unity Fellowship Church of Baltimore and is an elder in the Unity Fellowship Church movement. He is the grandfather of 7 and great uncle to 8. Oh, there's 7 now. Oh, 8. Okay, so he's the grandfather of 8. His hobbies include his grandchildren, cooking, music, laundry, okay, really, and binge watching TV programs. Some of his favorites are The Walking Dead, Greenleaf, This Is Us, Power, Empire, Game of Thrones, How to Get Away with Murder, Kim's Convenience, Pose, Grace and Frankie, AJ and the Queen, 911, The Chair, Manifest, All Law and Orders, and of course, Murder, She Wrote, and The Golden Girls. Rest in peace, Betty. Known as the engagement specialist, he sees himself as an instrument of change. He works every day to help people find the best in themselves and others. He lives by the words of one of his favorite songs, sung by the late Mahalia Jackson at the funeral of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word or song, If I can show somebody that he, she, ze, or they are traveling wrong, then my living shall not be in vain. Please join me in welcoming Reverend Dr. Jamie Washington.
Then my living shall not be in vain. No, my living shall not be in vain. If I can help somebody as I pass along, then my living shall not be in vain. Good morning, good morning, good morning, and thank you so much for this opportunity to be with you and share this space at this time. It is such an honor and a privilege to be with Waukesha Technical College on this time. Thank you to my host, those who have been working to make it possible for me to be here. Congratulations to our award winner. Thank you so much for this space. And as we move into our time together, I'm going to share my screen in a moment, but I want to just thank all of you, my nearly 150 some odd plus folks, for joining us this morning. Again, my name is Jamie Washington. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I am joining you from the Piscataway Tribal Nations land. I recognize the land that I am joining you from are the original aboriginal homes of the Piscataway folks. I also acknowledge the painful history and genocide and forced removal from this territory. I know that without them today, we would not be able to have this conversation or be in this space. So we honor the history, the legacy, the truth of the land that we occupy. I also want to honor today the labor. I want to do a labor acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge those who helped to build these shores, build these institutions, build these lands, build these organizations that we are a part of. Many who came to these shores voluntarily, many who did not. Many who had access to our institutions and many who did not. And so we don't take for granted that we did not get here on our own, that we stand on the shoulders of many who have gone before us. I'm going to share my screen and I want to invite you into our conversation today. Dr. King invited us to consider, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all of us indirectly. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. We cannot escape that what matters to you matters to me, even if I am not conscious of its mattering. And so today, I want us to take this opportunity to remember, to celebrate, to act. To remember, to celebrate, to act. The theme for MLK 2022, wow, that says 2020. Gosh, I'm back right before the pandemic. 2022 invites us into knowing that we must remember why we are here today. We must celebrate and we must act. As we enter this 39th anniversary of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday being officially a holiday, I want to encourage you to remember. I know that many folks who are joining us today, in fact, cannot remember because they were not here yet to remember. So it invites you folks to learn. You have to learn that which you did not know. And while many of us were here and might be able to remember, we might not have had a level of consciousness to understand the dynamics that was going on at that time. So as we move into this holiday, we want to think about this observance. We want to think about why it matters. We want to start by remembering. We want to remember that for many of us, the understanding that from the time that Dr. King was assassinated in 1968 to the time that his holiday, we got a federal national holiday, was not overnight. So from 68 to 1983 were the years that efforts were made in order to create and to acknowledge and to celebrate the legacy of his work. Many of you don't remember, so that you aren't able to celebrate the fact that the song Happy Birthday to You, the Stevie Wonder version of that song, was written for Dr. King. In 1979, there was a defeat of the making of Dr. King's holiday, a national holiday. Stevie Wonder decided to get in the fight and wrote a birthday song that many of us sing every day, every time we get together with our families and friends, you know, not the traditional, but the happy birthday to you. That was and is the birthday song that was written for Dr. King. Most of us just know the chorus and don't know the words. And so I want us to celebrate Dr. King in that way and to recognize that we must celebrate the accomplishments that have occurred since then and all of the shoulders that Dr. King stood on, the labor that went before him, those who didn't get a holiday, those who didn't get their names mentioned, those who fought for liberation and freedom, such that Dr. King would have even the platform that he stood on. And so today, as we celebrate, I want you to think about all of those in your own lives who have been in the fight for justice. And as we honor and celebrate Dr. King today, I invite you to put in the chat, who do I celebrate who celebrated the work of Dr. King? Let's just invite that energy. Some of those folks are still present with us, and some of those folks are no longer with us. Put in the chat who we want to honor and celebrate as we remember Dr. King today. So important that we realize that Dr. King was a symbol that represented this fight for justice. He was the voice for many who were voiceless. And as we come together on this day, we must celebrate. It is dishonoring for us to come into this space and not celebrate where we've come from. Beyond not just about President Obama, not just about Maya Angelou being the first Black woman on a coin. There's so much that has been done. So I want you thinking about the teachers, the grandmothers, the doctors, the lawyers, the business people, the politicians, the grassroots folks who have been fighting for the dream and the vision that Dr. King had, and invite their energy and presence into this moment. The tagline for 2022 is a day on, not a day off. Remember, act, remember, celebrate, and act. A day on, not a day off. And so what I want to invite us to do is to consider what's the act. If you don't take time to celebrate, you move into the action in a way that is dishonoring of the labor. I want you to hear that very clearly. If you don't take time to celebrate the progress, you move into the action in a way that is dishonoring of the labor of those who have gone before you. And so my comments today, I appreciate my colleague so beautifully naming and inviting Angela Frazier, naming and acknowledging some of the things that Dr. King invited us to remember. Many powerful words, and I will share some of those in my talk today, but I want to move us into this notion of acting and why acting is so important. The problem with the acting, the action that many of us have taken, is that many folks are stuck in 1963 March on Washington. Many folks are stuck in the I Have a Dream speech. And for some, the vision of the I Have a Dream speech, black and white together, we shall overcome, all of those things feel like maybe those have been accomplished. What is it that we are concerned about? What's present today? And so I want us to get connected to what matters today. And so I want to invite you into understanding the context before the content. Consider the context that we live in today and why that matters. So as you consider the content of celebrating, acknowledging, creating change, moving toward justice, that's content. That's what we want to do. But what is the context that we are trying to do that in? I invite you as you join us in this conversation and engagement today to consider context and the things that inform your context. I want to say today that you inform the context. Your identities inform the context. Your background, your history, who you're with informs your context. What's it like there with the people around you? Anybody who's ever been an only in a space, you go into a room and you're fighting for justice and you're fighting for what's right, and you look around and you find, I'm the only one. Are there people with me? So is it me? Is it us? So me, my identities, my race, my class, my gender, my sexual orientation, my ability, my nationality, my time at this institution. Am I the only one using my voice? So who's the us and who's the we? Who's sitting at the table? What's the environment and the location that I'm operating in? I want you to stay connected to where are we located? What's the policy? What's the college mission? What's the belief about justice and equity? What's been the history of dynamics of exclusion? What's the present day dynamics? And what's the future that we're hoping for? Let's talk about time and timing for a moment, folks. As I consider the context, it is important as you think about the conversations and the work that you need to do to act, you must consider the time and the timing, right? Am I acting in a space and time that is a reaction, or am I acting in a space and time that is about a vision, right? A vision for a better world, a vision for a better place, or am I reacting or responding to some harm that has just been done? The actions look different depending upon the context. What are the power dynamics that are at play that allow me to be in, that don't allow me to be in, that have me silenced, that have me concerned about my voice? And what, in fact, folks, is the quality of our engagement? Most of us know that over these past several years, there has been an increased polarization, politicization of this notion of justice. And the quality of our engagement has been sorely lacking. We cannot have effective conversations with one another because of cancel culture, because of the inability to hear that your perspective and my perspective can exist in the same space. And we have to look at how those perspectives are in alignment with community and inclusion. So you might see us doing it this way, and I might see us doing it in that way. But if we can't engage around it, we will not move the vision forward. We will not move the vision forward. Take a deep breath, folks, and I want you just to go ahead and think about what are the things that are informing your context right now in this conversation. You can put those things in the chat as well. What's informing my context? What's in the way? What stops me? Well, how, it's about the history. It's about the past harm. It's about us trying to have this conversation right now in the space of reaction to harm that has been done. Pay attention to your context. How are the power dynamics stopping your discussion? How are the power dynamics informing and impacting your engagement? Why I share this, folks, is because if we're to be effective acting for the next round, we have to engage these dynamics, particularly if they are dynamics that are hampering our abilities to hear one another and move forward. What's informing your context as we remember, celebrate, and act? The context is also impacted not just by our local experiences, but by our national experiences. And I want you to pay attention, folks, to where we have been over these last 2 years. I want you not to lose the impact, the trauma that we have all collectively experienced as a result of pandemic number one, health pandemic, that raised its head, that showed up for us back in 2020. Back in 2020, right around this time, we began to hear of COVID-19, health pandemic. Then we moved to pandemic number two, 1619, systemic racism that raised its head through the murdering of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor. In that space and time, the uprisings, the enough is enough, the no justice for Breonna, the returning to our campuses in boxes, the impact on our engagement as human beings happened and been affected by us being able to turn off our cameras and mute ourselves and not be in community in the same way. That very year, as we began to talk more, to engage more around anti-racism and anti-Black violence, our then president signed an executive order saying that these conversations are anti-American propaganda that impacted many of our communities' ability to have the engagement so that we could engage. The vote, the polarizing of the vote, while we had the end of the election resulted in President Biden and Vice President Harris, the country was divided in 2020. We move into 2021 and just celebrated the anniversary of January 6th, the insurrection, the inauguration, the call for impeachment, the vaccinations, again, the rise of racism in the example of anti-Asian hate last April in the murders in Atlanta. The verdict. Many of us remember where we were at the time the verdict was named and what was going on in our lives. I want us to pay attention, folks, the context of action. These things inform the way and our ability to act. As we move through that, thank you, Jeffrey, extraordinary segregation. And then we move, and we thought we were coming out of this COVID thing, and we moved from Delta to Omicron to other variants. And so we still are disconnected, and folks are simply exhausted. So breathe. You can't be effective acting if you won't breathe. Just breathe. And so as you consider all of the things, and this doesn't represent all of the national and international impact of the last 2 years, but as you consider just these and others, what are you left feeling? What are you left feeling given our context to fight for justice? just put in the chat, I'm left feeling what? I'm left feeling, given the context of all of these things. Exhausted, yes, exhausted, yes. Just breathe, exhausted. Sad, yes, yes. Emotionally drained, tired, discouraged, yes. Time for a new step forward, yes, absolutely, absolutely. There you go. And what I want us, the reason I'm inviting you into the chat in this way is because I want us in a collective emotional space of understanding what the context and how the context is impacting our ability to act. And so just breathe. And as you're breathing, I want you to acknowledge that your feelings are real and you are not alone. And so I want us to be able to be present with those and to create space for us to not just wallow in those spaces, but to acknowledge the importance so that we can restore our energy so that our actions can be effective. You cannot pour from an empty cup. And if you are exhausted, when you show up in a room and show up in a space, you don't show up with the best energy to help move us forward. And so, as we consider our work today, I want you to know that while Dr. King was operating in a context that focused largely on the poor, the working class, and the racially minoritized, the context of that conversation. But his dream was expandable. His vision was expandable. And he said in his words, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so as we come together today to look at where we need to be acting, I want us to consider where there is injustice around sexual orientation, religious, spiritual practice, social, economic, class, gender, gender identity, nationality, ability, age, and race. Race is centralized in this conversation. I want you to consider the importance of the centralization of race as we consider the context of this conversation. We can't do this work if we won't do race. And so I invite you into the conversation today to acknowledge the importance of doing your race work. Now, many of us are trying to create spaces of inclusion and justice without owning injustice. Dr. King invited us to note that there was injustice in the world. And I want you to think about on all of these identities where the dynamics of injustice are at play. And in order for you to create justice, you must be willing to own injustice. Are you a member of the groups that benefits from the system and the way that it is set up? Or are you a member of the groups that are disenfranchised? That's where we have to begin so that our actions can be more effective. And so I want you to consider, as we act, I named that many of us are stuck in 1963. Take a look at these images. How many of you remember those old flip phones and the beepers and the pagers and the cassette tapes? Remember those things and how, I remember when I got my first VCR, I was so excited. It was a big old deal. I went to Montgomery Ward, I got my VCR and I called home and told my mama I got a VCR. How many of us still have VCR tapes with no place to play them, right? Got piles and piles of even now CDs, right? That we don't even use, we just have them. And so these are old technologies. They were cutting edge when they came out. But if we try to operate, to act with these technologies today, wouldn't we be left behind? We can't We couldn't have this conversation on those computers. It doesn't have the capacity, the motherboard, the bandwidth. It doesn't have that. And I'm sharing this technology because what we understand today is technology really matters. And if we are trying to act with old technologies, we're going to be left behind and become obsolete. What I want to say to you is many folks are trying to act with old technology. They're trying to do the actions needed for 2022 with 1980s, 1990s, 2000 technology, and it's time for an upgrade. Sometimes folks will say to me, well, Jamie, what do you mean old technology? Old mindsets and operating systems. Old mindsets and operating systems. Here's some of them. I don't see color. I just see people as people. There's only one race, the human race. Let's just treat everybody the same. Everybody is equal. That is not fair. Don't give them this and us not have this. We are the world. We are the children. Some of you remember that song. We love that song. We sang, but that song was about very much, let's just all get along. Let's not create tension. We all bleed the same, but the problem with that old technology is that it did not invite us into the tension and the discomfort that is needed to have honest conversation and do real culture transformation. America is not a melting pot, but a salad bowl. It was a big deal for us to move from the melting pot to the salad bowl. And while that was progress in that space and time, it is so important that we recognize that what we were not considering was the bowl that you needed to fit into in order to be heard and seen. That in many spaces, the bowl also meant that you had to be cut up into pieces because you didn't fit into that. Multiculturalism, learning about the diverse other, equal opportunity for all, myth of meritocracy, everybody has had the chance. This notion of rugged individualism, I know someone who was able to, I had to do it, I came from this space, and so there's not any system that's at place, it's just individual will. And so if they just worked harder, they would be able to. We didn't intend to leave anyone out. So we focus more on our intention than the impact. So old technology is that our intent is enough. Because I'm a good person, because I don't mean any harm, that's all that matters. The last two that I want to offer you in terms of old technology is that I am a minoritized person. So I was raised poor. I identify as a person with a disability. I identify as a LGBTQAI person. And so as a result of that, because I am minoritized by another identity, I don't have to do race work. Like I get oppression, I get exclusion. And so we often find ourselves in this space of, again, oppression Olympics, where we're doing, my pain's greater than your pain, or I understand and I don't need to do. We need to do our work around all of the identities. And in the context of this conversation, as I named, you cannot move in action to the next space if you won't do race. And the final one there that I want to name is this notion of having BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color friends in your family, in your community. My supervisor is Black, my colleagues are Latinx, my whole team is Asian from different parts of the country, so that my partner is Native American. I've got all of this proximity with no capacity. And so folks confuse that because you're near, that you have the ability to engage. And this is the old technology. If you've seen any of this, just go ahead and put a thumbs up or just a reaction. If you can't do the reaction button, just put a star or something in the chat. How many of us see again in 2022, this old technology alive and well. Hear me, folks. This is not making it bad or wrong. It mattered in the space and time. But if we are to move forward, we must upgrade our technologies. We must upgrade it. If you, in fact, are one who has ever had to upgrade your technology, I did right before I came on. My computer said, you got an update, right? How many of us have had an update and not wanted to do it? Like, no, I ain't got that. So put in the chat why folks don't want to upgrade. Why folks don't want to upgrade? What gets in the way? What stops people from upgrading and updating? What stops people? Change is hard. Yes, thanks, Angela. What else? Change is scary and it's bad. Yes, that's good. Right. Comfort. I like it the old way. I may not know how. One of my favorite pieces about this part is that sometimes we will have to learn from people who are younger than us. Sometimes it's not about how long you've been in it. Sometimes it's about, in fact, how familiar and comfortable you are with it. So why do I need to use pronouns? What does that mean? Why do I have to engage anti-racism? Why do I have to engage white privilege or being a BIPOC person? Why do I have to talk about that? Many of us grew up in an era in old technology where we just wanted to all get along. And this, oh, thanks, Douglas. Fear of it not working. Yes, right? So what if I do what Jamie said? What if we try to do this and it doesn't work? These are the reasons that folks are often comfortable upgrading. And if you don't upgrade, if you don't update, you will become obsolete. Now, no upgrade fixes everything. No upgrade or update fixes everything. We all know that there's certain things. And I show up today, folks, on this Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, MLK, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration Day, inviting you to upgrade. I'm that upgrade notification, update notification, but nothing will happen unless you act. If you don't push on the button, if you don't practice these things, it won't matter. And so here's, as I move to the last comments, that I want you to consider these 5 things. If you are going to, in fact, update, upgrade, you must be willing to consider these 5 things. Not fixing everything, but if we are to act for the next round, we must be willing to create safe and brave spaces for learning. It is important that we recognize that all of us are connected in an inescapable destiny, an inescapable network of mutuality tied to a single garment of destiny. And if that is the truth, what affects you affects me, I must be willing to create and be in a container where we can learn together. Now, sometimes what folks confuse when I talk about safety is they confuse and conflate safety with comfortable. I'm not talking about a comfortable space. I'm talking about a space where it is safe to deal with your discomfort. So to create a space where there can be tension and look, communities can learn. I can learn that had problem, that was harmful. Common language. We want to be sure that we're understanding what we're talking about. So creating the space for the learning. So what do you mean when you say anti-racism, systemic oppression, white privilege, whiteness? What does that mean when we talk about heteronormativity? What does it mean, again, when we're talking about anti-Asian violence? What do we mean when we're talking about Islamophobia? We have to create the spaces for the common language and understanding. The purple box takes us to the importance of DEI focus and not just being focused. We must not allow that the focus on that all things matter takes us away from the conversations and the work that we need to do around race. Again, as I said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And if we don't do our racial work, then we will continue to spin in the dynamics of exclusion at the individual, at the group, and at the systems levels. We must build our capacity to experience the full range of human emotions, full range, and not have particularly minoritized people have to tie themselves up into knots to make sure everyone else is comfortable. So I can't show up in my full, authentic rage and pain and anger and fear and disappointment because I'm afraid of what that's going to mean for white people. It's not going to serve me in a community. I need my white siblings to be able to handle my rage and not make it about them. It is critical for men to be able to handle the rage and the pain and the disappointment, cis men of cis women, right? Of trans women. It is important that we're able to handle each other's joy and fear and pain, and that we can be fully emotional people and not have to limit ourselves. And finally, in order to do that, we must do our own work. Identities matter. If you don't do your self-work, you cannot show up effectively in this conversation. So these are the upgrades. I invite you to consider, where might I start doing some work or increase my work so that I can act? Is it in the creating the safe and brave spaces? Is it in the understanding of language? Is it in the being sure that I am not allowing everything to take me away from the conversation of race? Is it understanding the importance, the critical importance of allowing folks, including oneself, to have a full range of human emotion? Or is it in that space where you must consider doing your own work? Folks, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We must do this work around all identities. We must own injustice if we are to create justice. Morality cannot be legislated, but behavior can be regulated. Judicial decrees may not change the heart, but they can restrain the heartless. Folks, we must act in ways that will help to change behavior and hope that in that process, hearts get changed. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Folks, if we are in a dark place and we are trying to act and we are acting out of darkness, we will only beget more darkness. It is critical that we seek to show up in love and light. Love and light, folks, don't get me wrong, doesn't mean without anger, doesn't mean without urgency. It means simply in the light and love of humanity. Our lives, as my friend already said, begin and end when we become silent about the things that matter. I'm wearing today, your silence will not protect you. I want us to be clear about the things that matter. What are the things that matter, and how am I talking about it? In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. I'm an ally. I care. I'm an accomplice. I'm right there. But when something happened, when things get said, I remain silent. The ones I counted on and depended upon remained silent. Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? On this MLK Day, many of us are thinking about what's our charge from this space? You show up at this event, what are you going to do from this event to keep the work moving forward? The ultimate measure of a man is not where he, she, they, Z stand in the moments of comfort and convenience, but where they stand at times of challenge and controversy. Folks, as I prepare to wrap up, I want us to recognize that in order to move in action for the next round, you must be willing to engage conflict and discomfort. There is no way to move to the next round of justice and inclusion if you only want to stay comfortable. You must be willing to be uncomfortable. When? The time is always right to do what is right. When? Now. The time. What time? Right now. What time is it right now? Now is the right time. Faith is taking the first step even when you don't see the whole staircase. People, some folks say, well, what are we trying to get to? Where are we trying to get? When will we have arrived? And some folks are stuck in not being able to act because they can't see the end. And move in the direction of liberation and freedom and start moving. Keep moving. Keep moving. And then we'll be able to sing together. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. Thank you.
Wow. So if we were in church right now, I think it would be time to pass the collection plate. And in the words of my colleague, Angela, she would say, you just preached a word. And so I just want to thank you for that message. And I hope that it inspired people to act after today. Again, we're only together for a limited amount of time right now, but what happens when this event closes? So to close this event is Douglas Clark's Pritchard. Douglas is a professional truck driving instructor at WCTC. He is currently a student in the Technical College System Career Path Program at UW-Stout. He facilitates at the Waukesha County Jail in the Wisconsin Regional Training Partnership outside of his duties at WCTC. Recently, Douglas won the first trucking rodeo for the National Association for Publicly Funded Truck Driving Schools. In addition, Douglas is a decorated Army veteran that has served in peace and wartime operations. To share some final thoughts, here's Douglas Clark's Pritchard.
Good afternoon. Reverend Dr. Washington, what a great word you just gave us on today. I don't know how to close after that, but I'm gonna try to do my best, and I'm so glad you stopped with the quotes because you didn't touch the one that I did find that I wanted to speak on. So I greatly appreciate you. You said in today, what's the act? What's your action? For everyone that's joining us today, I want to charge you with an action. I want to charge you to be a seed planter. I want to charge you to plant some seeds, not for us in this generation, but as Dr. Washington said, we stand on the word, we stand on the work of those that came before us. So what work are you leaving for our future generations? What seed are you planting? I want to charge you to be cautious of where you harvest your information from. With so many inlets and outlets, social media, social networks, and the media, we often get lost in what we're harvesting from. And I'm also a grandchild of a farmer. And I know as being a grandchild of a farmer, farmers tend to plant what they like and what they find comfort in. So I want to challenge you. I want to challenge you to be a harvester and a planter of the good. Be a planter of love to chase out the hate. Be a planter of light to chase out the darkness. What work will you leave behind? What seeds will you plant? And what kind of harvester shall you be? That is your charge, to set up something for the next generation and those that will follow that generation. That is my charge from me to you and from this panel of great people. I hope this ceremony has touched your heart, your mind, your body, and soul, and has planted something inside of you that says you will be a part of the change. May God bless you and keep you in all that you ask and do. Have a great day.
All right. Oh, there are some questions for you, Reverend Dr. Washington. So I was about to dismiss everyone, but I'm gonna step back and just pose these questions that have come in. So many state legislatures are moving to pass bills banning schools from learning about racism and dealing with conflict. I'm stuck, not sure where to begin. How do I move in, and this is in quotes, the direction?
Sure. Thank you. That is a wonderful, wonderful. And so what you're naming is context. What are the things that are at play? The power dynamics, the political environment, those are the contextual things. So how do I navigate a legislator, a legislation, a group of folks, legislators, who are forwarding things that I don't believe serve us. I don't believe are in alignment with what we need for our children for the next round, right? What my brother just named around, Douglas named around planting, right? Where are we putting our energy? And so everybody won't be doing the legislative work, but some of us, that's our thing, right? And so, first of all, I'd like to say, don't go it alone, right? You don't have to be in this alone. Now, I'm not saying that sometimes you won't have to go it alone, but I invite you to the concern that you have, see where else that concern is. So your children got some friends? Let's talk to the friends' parents. Anybody else concerned about this, right? And so what is it that we would not allow our legislature to stop, right? So always have to get in mind that, well, if they were trying to do this, this is what we would be doing. Lots of times we de-skill ourselves when we come to the conversation of inclusion, whether it's race or gender identity. The legislature is saying this and, oh my gosh, we don't know what to do. Well, what if they were saying this, right? What if they were saying little girls can't go to school no more? Well, we would figure out a way to say, that ain't gonna happen, right? So what I'm saying is use what you know to engage your legislation, to engage your legislators, right? And that might mean, I've got to talk to my congressperson. I got to talk to my representatives. I've got to say, so how do we best address this? What is it that you don't understand about engaging the truth of racial history and the impact of that today? So we have to be, again, I go back to in engagement, right? And we have to show up in that place with light, not just pointing fingers and making people wrong. And so maybe I'm not the one to lead that charge because I ain't got no light right now, right? I'm just mad, right? And so I don't think, and please don't hear this, that we don't need to have some energy that folks might show up in, well, we just need to blow up the whole thing. That energy is real. Like we need to burn it down. We got some folks who need to do that. I don't make that wrong. I just don't think that's sustainable, right? And then we just all are left with burnt down stuff and nothing to rebuild, right? So what I'm saying is maybe some folks do need to show up in the way that is just challenging and tearing things down. But there's gotta be some folks who are willing to help to rebuild it and to engage and to create that space. So you have to figure out where you are in that. And who am I and what's my action in this space and time? But even if your action is to tear it down or to be in continuous criticism, make sure that action is coming from a place of love and light. That is coming from a place of wanting the world to be better and not from a place of that you are better because you see it in this way and they don't. Did you get that nuance? There's a nuance there. I want the world to be better for my children. And You may not see it in the same way that I do, but that doesn't make me better than you. So I'm going to engage your humanity to see where we can come to a common understanding.
We have just a couple more questions that came in.
Sure.
What does your shirt say?
I don't, Sherry, I don't have to run. I've got 15 minutes or so. And so as long as the webinar won't shut us down, I can stay for another 15 minutes. If folks need to leave, we totally respect that, but I'm happy to stay and respond to some questions.
Great, thank you for that. So there was a question about, what does your shirt say?
Mm-hmm. It says, your silence will not protect you. Audre Lorde. And so again, it goes back to one of the comments that Dr. King made around silence and the importance of our not going silent and losing our voices. So I talk about losing your voice and developing your voice. Some of us have never developed a voice for justice and liberation. We have a heart for it. We care about it, but we just get silent in the room. We shake our heads, we're sad, we're disappointed. We think this shouldn't be going on, but we don't have a voice to address it. And so we must develop that voice, right? Others of us lose our voice in different spaces. I lose it when we're talking with my family about this stuff. I have it when I'm talking with my students about this stuff, right? So again, I have it when I'm talking at my church about this stuff, but not when I'm talking at work about this stuff, right? So when do I lose my voice, and have I developed my voice?
Next question. What advice do you have for moving conversations past conflict to explore possibility?
Sure. So I think that it is important to, before we move past conflict, to move in conflict, to move through the conflict and the tension. So often we want to get out of the tension too fast. And so if we begin to see the conflict and the tension as a beautiful part of transformation, then we won't want to get out of it so quickly, right? That if we can, as Glenn Singleton says in terms of key things, that if we can expect and accept non-closure, so that we don't have to feel like everything has to be tied up in a nice, neat little bow before we're done, right? So, well, okay, can we move on? All right. So everybody understand? Okay, so what we gonna do? You're moving too fast in what we gonna do. Like, why do people keep saying? Because we don't experience you as having heard the depth of pain that this situation is causing, the impact of that. What we experience is you don't want to deal with that. You just want to move us to solution, right? Moving to solution is not bad. That's an American narrative. It's a male narrative. It's a dominant narrative. It's not bad, but it can't be the only way of operation. And when we move to that too quickly, we miss the nuanced understanding that's going to have that action be effective, right? So my response is, don't try to move too quickly. I would bet if you are able to, if people experience you able to be in the discomfort and the conflict with them, they can move through it so they can get the action. But if they don't, they stand in conflict because they haven't felt heard, haven't felt engaged, and they feel the attitude and energy of, can we just get this done? And quiet them. So that's a thing.
Okay, just a couple more. How can we encourage others to join our efforts in inclusion, equity, efforts in diversity, equity, and inclusion?
So this is one of my favorite questions. I'm so excited that this came up. So I had to learn that everything ain't for everybody. All of us need to have a foundational value caring about humanity for this conversation to work. So everybody has like, I care what happens to Sherry. I care what happens to Angela. I care what happens to our captionists. I care, even if I don't know your name, that's why that was an important one. To our captionists, I don't see their name there. Denise and to Douglas, I care about their humanity and their experience. If you don't care, that's a whole different conversation, right? But if we all understand that we care about our humanity, then are we willing then to engage the truth about our humanity and our experiences as human? That all of us as humans aren't having the same experience on the planet, right? And that some of us are moving through with privilege and being heard and access, and others of us are moving through with some challenges. So around race, around class, around gender, sometimes I'm in this group, sometimes I'm in this group. If I acknowledge that that's the truth, in order for us to move the conversation is we have to recognize and have a problem with this dynamic still being present. And then do our work to help to move this. Every generation has this opportunity to move us from here to here to here. But if you don't acknowledge the truth of this space and you don't care about people who are in the group that you're in or other groups, then it's a value discussion. It's a value-based discussion. So how do we move people along is that we have to first make sure that we're talking about the caring about people and humanity. And once we've gotten that established, and then it's like, well, so do you recognize that some people around race move through the world not having to worry about them things because of race? We're not talking about because of class or ability. We're talking about race here, right? And others do. So if we're talking about class, do we recognize that? If we're talking about gender, do we recognize that? Once we have acknowledged and recognized that, then we might not all know the histories or the impact, but that's where the engagement has to happen. From that, what I wanted, the long answer, that was a long answer to get to this point around, how do we invite others in? We invite others in who share that same value and commitment. Now, some of us are going to come in at entry level, and our work is going to be to make sure that we never forget that this matters, right? Right. So I talk about, when I'm working this conversation, I work with 3 levels. I work with everybody. I work with leaders. So leaders and supervisors have to be able to lead with a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. It's a basic level of competence, right? It's like basic level of competence. You can't be a leader and manager if you don't know how to do email, right? In this time and frame, there's some basic levels of competence. You need to know how to get into this and then get into that. So I work with everybody. I work with leaders. And then I work with the next generation of Jamies, who are going to be the people who are going to do what I'm doing. So I care about the environment. I care, right, about the whales, right? I care, right, about, but I'm not out every day doing talks about that. Everybody's not called to everything. And I remember when I would get mad because people didn't show up with the same energy around this stuff that I am. And then I got clear that it's not their call. It's not theirs to show up in. It is yours. And so look for me's, look for the people who are the ones who, this is the way they breathe. This is how they get up in the morning. They can't do anything. Get in community with them and work with the next round of leaders so that they can be effective in leading and help to create the foundation so everybody knows. But everyone is not going to be in it like you're going to be in it, right? Because it's not everybody's calling or vocation or purpose for the planet, and it's going to look different. And if you want to invite others in, you have to pay attention to the invitation. Are you creating an environment that would have folks, and lots of times the leaders are coming from, the next generation of you is coming from this leader group. But if you've not created a space for that, to hand off the baton, to invite the next generation, then sometimes the problem is with the inviter, not the people who are not coming. So I often talk about, I go to spaces all the time and folks will say, well, Jamie, you preaching to the choir, right? We're not the ones who need to be here. These other people need to be in the room. And I then remind folks that I've been also a minister of music for over 40 years. And what I know about the choir is that you need rehearsal. And so sometimes the problem is you only show up when it's your turn to sing, when you have the solo. And we all know, any of us who have been in spaces with the choir, if the choir ain't good, people might not be coming. And so some of the challenge of getting the right people in the space is that the choir needs to do their work to show up more effectively.
Well, what would be some advice or things to do to ensure folks provide these safe spaces and give others the confidence and support to have that voice they don't have in order to speak up?
And so, you know, I think that what I would say, and I needed this to be the last one, is breathe, right? And then to show up on the journey, right? And what I mean by that is we have to be willing to show up with the skills of listening, sharing, vulnerability, humility, and patience. So I want us who are in this work to recognize that listening, hearing to the end, hearing the hearts and the intentions are critical, and not just the surface, right? You have to listen differently, not just hear, but listen, right? I just heard what you said, but did I listen so that I'm able to take the nuance and hear your heart and what your intention was? And can I get past, you misgendered me, right? To hear in that moment, not saying that always you need to get past that. That's not what I'm saying. Please don't hear that, because I don't want nobody to say, he said gender identity didn't matter. I did not say that. I'm glad this is being recorded. Don't lie on me. I did not say that. But I said in the moment, if we're having a raced conversation, don't get hung up don't major in the minor, right? And while that may not be a minor thing overall, in that moment, in the telling of that story or the asking of that question, that wasn't the essence of it, right? So are you able to listen such that then you can reflect that you heard, and then you can speak to, and the misgendering did happen, right? So you can speak to that, because I'm not saying to ignore that. I'm saying in the moment to listen through that to fully hear, right? Listen, share what you heard, share yourself. You must be willing to be, vulnerability is a skill. It's an absolute skill. And humility is another skill. Showing up like I don't know everything, being willing to be vulnerable and say, well, here's my journey. Absolutely. So when we think about the self-work, you have to develop the skills and the capacity to have patience and grace for yourself first, so that you can show up modeling that with others, right? When I was an undergraduate student at Slippery Rock State College back in I was committed to ending racism. I was gonna end it before I left, right? Well, so much for that one. And then I left Slippery Rock and I went to Indiana University in Bloomington, and I discovered sexism. Who knew, right? There was sexism. And I was like, oh no, that's not okay. I'm gonna end that too. I'm getting ready to end sexism too. And I thought I was gonna end that before I left. Still working on that one too. I share this to say, folks, and again, I appreciate all of you so much for being here and this work we get to do together today. But I share that to say that what I realized after more than nearly 40 years of being in this work, that mine may not be to fix it. It may simply to be to leave it better than I found it. This work didn't start with me, and it won't end with me. It is this honoring of the legacy of my grandmother, Elizabeth Williams, and Thurman Williams, my grandfather, who did not get to be in these kinds of spaces, to think that everything started when Jamie got to be able to be there. And it is this honoring to think that I'm going to know everything in my short time that's going to fix it for my grandchildren. And so my work is to simply leave it better than I found it and prepare the next generation to continue the fight for liberation, justice, and freedom. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Washington, for just sharing the space with us today and for your inspiring words. And I would just like to again remind everyone that not only are we celebrating, but we're acting. So enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and thank you for sharing time with us today.
Recording stopped.